Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're not just, visiting history. We're trying to look at the deepest source code, if you will, of the man who fundamentally changed how we see the human mind.
Mm-hmm.
Our mission here is to dive into the source material that links the intensely private life, the identity of Sigmund Freud,
Yes, the Freud.
founder of psychoanalysis, directly to his revolutionary public work.
And what we're really looking at here, it's deeper than just saying his life influenced his work.
Right.
The source material, it really shows that in Freud's case, his own internal world was the laboratory. Sexuality wasn't just a theme he explored. It was quite literally the bedrock, the foundation he built the whole structure of psychoanalysis on.
Which means, pulling that thread, we get to a central question for you listening right now.
Yeah.
How did Freud's own personal struggles, the very rigid, deeply repressed culture of his time, late Victorian Vienna,
Yeah, that context is crucial.
and his intense self-exploration, how did that all become the core engine of his thought? Let's unpack this. And maybe we should start with the single most controversial bit,
Yeah.
his radical redefinition of sexuality itself.
Yeah, absolutely. It's vital to place Freud in his time first. Victorian Vienna, sexuality was, a very narrow concept back then,
The fuck how?
defined primarily by the genital act and the necessity of procreation. It was a subject kept behind closed doors, really, very hidden.
And he just burst that open, didn't he? By
Yeah.
introducing this concept of libido.
Exactly, libido.
And this wasn't just physical desire, as we might think of it. It was a much bigger idea.
Much bigger. In his theory, libido is this psychic energy, a fundamental life force, you could say. It drives all behavior, survival, pleasure.
And the really shocking part, he said it begins in infancy.
Precisely. That was the bombshell. The psychic energy, it expresses itself through a series of stages he laid out, the psychosexual stages.
We often hear the terms, right? Oral, anal, phallic, latency, genital.
Mm-hmm. But the profound implication, the thing that really shook people, was that infants and children were sexual beings, concentrating this libido, this energy, on different parts of the body, different erogenous zones.
That just flew in the face of conservative morality at the time.
Completely challenged it.
Think about it in that context. Suddenly, a baby sucking its thumb.
Yeah.
It wasn't just about comfort anymore.
No, in his view, it was the earliest sign of this primal life energy.
So this expansion of what sexuality means, dragging it out of the bedroom and, into the nursery.
Yeah.
That's what made his work so explosive,
Yeah.
so controversial.
And this framework, this idea of libido, it leads directly to how he understood illness, mental illness especially.
Okay, so if libido is this powerful, constant driver, what happens when culture or family or our own anxieties force it underground? What happens then?
Blockage,
Huh.
which leads to repression. That was Freud's core argument about mental health.
Right.
The main cause of neuroses, and these could show up as physical symptoms, anxieties, phobias, all sorts of things, was the repression of these core sexual desires and other unconscious conflicts too. You push them down out of your conscious mind?
But they don't just disappear.
Not at all. They resurface. They come back as symptoms.
And this brings us to maybe his most famous and, let's be honest, most shocking concept that grew out of all this.
The Oedipus complex.
The Oedipus complex.
Yeah.
Yeah. By applying this wider definition of sexuality to the family, he basically theorized that a child goes through this phase.
An unconscious phase, importantly.
Right. Unconscious.
Yeah.
Experiencing sexual and competitive feelings towards their parents. I mean, for that era, that was a revolutionary idea.
Mm-hmm.
Deeply disturbing for many.
Absolutely. But, the sources also show something else interesting. While he was, yes, a product of his conservative time, his view of human desire was actually surprisingly fluid for the era. He argued that humans were inherently bisexual.
Meaning, we all carry the capacity for both homosexual and heterosexual feelings or attachments.
That was his view, yes. Our actual orientation, whether we identify as homo or heterosexual, he thought that depended on how our mind manages that innate, often conflicting tendency.
And there's evidence he was quite progressive on this for the time, right? Given the persecution that was common then.
There is. That famous 1935 letter is often cited. He wrote to a mother who was concerned about her homosexual son.
What did he say?
Well, the reports say he condemned the persecution and shame associated with homosexuality. He saw it as a variation in sexual development, not an illness or crime that needed curing.
So he was pushing boundaries and understanding, even while laying down these quite rigid rules about how the psyche works. Okay, so we see the foundation now, but the question is still, how did he develop these incredibly detailed theories? The answer seems to lie in his method.
Exactly. The sources really confirm this. For Freud, the primary source material was Freud himself.
He used himself as the test subject.
He pioneered this method we now call autoanalysis. Starting intensely around 1897, for several years, he essentially became his own patient.
And this wasn't just like quiet reflection, was it?
Oh no, far from it. He was methodically analyzing his own dreams, his anxieties, slips of the tongue, his childhood memories, everything.
You see this in his letters, right?
Ah.
Especially with Wilhelm Fleiss.
Yes, that correspondence is incredibly revealing. This intense period of self-study, it was the engine room. It's where psychoanalysis was really forged.
And digging into his own feelings, particularly about his parents. Those complicated, maybe ambivalent feelings.
That self-exploration was the crucible. That's where the theory of the Oedipus complex came from. He took his own internal landscape, his own family drama,
And made it universal.
and extrapolated outward to become, in his view, the central drama of human development for everyone.
Okay, and here's where it gets, as you said, really foundational. It was during this auto-analysis, this self-digging, that he made a huge pivot, a major shift in thinking.
Yes. Initially, he had this seduction theory.
Right, the idea that neuroses often stemmed from actual, real childhood sexual abuse.
Exactly. But that theory, it was proving difficult. Both therapeutically and just theoretically, it wasn't holding up consistently.
Why not?
Through his self-analysis, he began to realize he couldn't definitively tell the difference. He couldn't distinguish between a patient's memory of a real event and a really profound, vivid fantasy about an event,
So he couldn't be sure if the trauma was real or imagined.
or if the impact came from the reality or the internal fantasy. So he made this dramatic shift. He largely abandoned the seduction theory and gave much more weight, primacy really, to psychic fantasy.
Wait, let's slow down there, because that shift, that's monumental, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely monumental.
But by shifting the focus from literal external events like real abuse to internal psychic reality, the powerful, often unconscious fantasy or wish, he completely changed the game, redefined the battleground of the mind.
Precisely. It meant that what the patient believed or fantasized, even unconsciously, could have the same neurotic impact as something that actually physically happened.
That's a huge leap.
It was, and arguably it saved psychoanalysis. It allowed him to focus on internal conflicts, the Oedipal drama, the workings of the unconscious, rather than being tied down to finding verifiable external traumas in every case. Psychology decisively turned inward at that point.
Okay, so if the mind is swirling with these powerful, often repressed sexual urges, how does a person achieve something massive, like, founding an entirely new science?
Well, that's where sublimation comes in. This is the concept that connects genius or intense achievement directly back to that channeled energy.
How did that work?
Sublimation basically suggests that those powerful, instinctual, often unacceptable sexual impulses that raw libido we talked about can be channeled, redirected towards socially acceptable and often highly productive activities.
Like what?
Well, instead of acting on a forbidden urge, maybe you write a symphony, or you pursue science relentlessly, or you create incredibly complex intellectual theories.
So by this logic, Freud's own intense dedication, his lifelong focus on his work, his sheer intellectual output,
His genius, yes.
it could be interpreted as the direct result of his own repressed, redirected sexual energy.
That's the implication of the theory, yes.
Doesn't that feel a bit reductive, though? Doesn't sublimation risk minimizing genuine intellectual achievement, reducing all profound work down to just sort of redirected sex drive?
Well, that's the core critique, absolutely. It's a controversial idea. However, Freud didn't just see it as personal. He connected it to the bigger picture of human society.
How so?
In Civilization and its Discontents, he argued that civilization itself requires us to repress our most instinctual urges on a massive scale, both sexual and aggressive urges.
We have to hold them back to live together.
Exactly. So sublimation, in this view, isn't just a personal defense mechanism. It's the fundamental engine that allows culture to develop and prosper. We channel that raw energy into building things, creating art, establishing social order.
So it's the mechanism that builds civilization out of chaos.
That was his argument. It's the transformation of primal energy into cultural achievement. Hashtag the contextual limits and critiques.
Okay, so we've established that the engine of the theory was Freud's own life, his self-analysis, all within his specific Victorian context.
Yes.
But if the genius is working primarily from his own singular viewpoint, then surely his theories are going to inherit the limitations, the biases of that viewpoint.
That is the essential caveat. Absolutely. He who was a product of his time, a man of his time. And his prospective male, Western European, late 19th, early 20th century, it inevitably colored his work, especially when he tried to analyze women.
Right. This is the major area of criticism, isn't it? The critique that remains really potent today. His theories on female development.
Widely viewed now as flawed, yes, and fundamentally phallocentric.
Meaning centered on the male experience. On the penis, basically.
Yes, centered on the male anatomy and experience as the norm. Concepts like penis envy, for example. They positioned femininity as a kind of developmental path defined by lack, by what isn't there.
Like a failed form of masculinity.
That's how some critics interpret it. The sources suggest he saw women's psychological development as this long, complicated struggle to move away from the clitoris, except the vagina, for procreation. Often framing female life as heavily dominated by reproductive function. It reflected the biases of his era.
And he even admitted his own limitations here, didn't he? Famously called female sexuality.
The dark continent of psychoanalysis, yes.
That admission, I mean, while it's honest,
Yeah.
it also points to a pretty big blind spot, a theoretical gap built into a system that came largely from male autoanalysis.
It certainly does. And that gap, that bias, it didn't go unchallenged, even within the psychoanalytic movement. It spurred some really powerful counter voices.
Like Karen Horney.
Karen Horney, most notably, she directly confronted Freud's biases. She argued quite vehemently that the psychological differences observed between men and women, they didn't stem from biology or lack.
Often
From powerful sociocultural factors, from the unequal distribution of power, opportunity, and status in society. Culture, not anatomy, was destiny, in her view.
And she flipped his famous concept, didn't she? Which is just a brilliant move.
She did. Instead of just accepting penis envy as central, she proposed a counter idea: womb envy.
Womb envy.
The idea that the male unconscious might actually envy the female capacity to create life, to bear children, and that this could lead to men needing to compensate through other forms of achievement.
Wow. That really turns his framework on its head.
It was a necessary correction, absolutely. It showed that maybe Freud's structure wasn't universal, but rather reflected a specific cultural viewpoint. And, this intense focus, Freud's insistence on the sexual definition of the life force, that's also what ultimately led to the big split with Carl Jung.
Ah, yes, the famous breakup.
Yeah.
Their relationship was complex, but the split itself really highlights how central sexuality was to Freud's whole model, doesn't it?
It absolutely does.
What was the core disagreement there?
It really came down to the definition of libido itself. For Freud, as we've discussed, libido was primarily sexual energy, derived from primal instincts. For Jung, well, he wanted a broader, maybe more spiritual framework. He saw libido much more generally as a kind of creative life force, a psychic energy that could manifest in many ways creativity, spirituality, ambition, not necessarily tied only to its sexual origins.
So not just sex drive, but life drive.
Something like that. The conflict wasn't just methodological, it was deeply philosophical, about the fundamental nature of human motivation. And it showed that for Freud, the sexual foundation of the mind was absolutely non-negotiable. It was the hill he would die on, so to speak. #tag outro. So the final synthesis for you, the listener, is maybe this. Freud's legacy, it's an incredibly intricate tapestry. It's woven from these revolutionary insights on one hand and some deeply problematic limitations on the other. His work is just undeniably a reflection of that complex interplay between his own intimate life, his undeniable genius, and the very repressive cultural context he was swimming in.
Psychoanalysis itself almost feels like one of the most ambitious autobiographical projects ever undertaken.
That's a great way to put it. It really does.
So our deep dive today, I think it confirms that the intimate life and the public work of a figure like Freud, they are intrinsically linked.
Yeah.
You can't really separate them, for better and sometimes for worse.
No, you really can't.
His own self-analysis was this turbulent engine that powered a revolution in how we think about ourselves. And he remains this towering, deeply controversial figure even today.
Absolutely. Still debated, still influential.
So we'll leave you with this final thought to mull over. If Freud's intense intellectual work was, according to his own theory, partly a product of sublimated sexual energy, what's the sublimated drive behind our own most intense pursuits? Our creative projects, our professional ambitions, is the driving force behind our best work. Our genius's moments, truly just a channeled, redirected primal energy.
A provocative question indeed.
Something to think about until our next deep dive.